Alright, so right now you should have already read the graphic design project memo. Now, this, again, is another part of your overall group project for the end of the semester. Your finished draft of your recommendation report should have several graphics in it. So, to help you get the ball rolling, I'm going to have you make one of those graphics for your group project now, ahead of time. Now, graphics are used extensively in technical documentation throughout human history because graphics are used to simplify a lot of information into a very short amount of space. That's why I'm making these videos. In fact, this is kind of a part of visual rhetoric. Most people are visual learners now instead of just reading auditory learners. So it's better to actually see it done or have a person physically, visually explain something to you rather than just reading it yourself. So what you're going to do is, and this can be almost anything because as you can see from the notes and the PowerPoints and the readings, there are dozens of different types of graphics you can make for any sort of project or instructional manual or anything like that. So I'm actually only looking for a small amount of things. And if you look closely, I'm actually have the rubric here for which I'm grading you by. So, your graphic has to make a claim. You need some form of quantifiable or verifiable information that you are codifying in this image to make it easily understood by your readers. It has to be accurate data. It can't be falsehoods. It has to have some bearing in reality, research or otherwise. You need to follow the guidelines of the textbook, and I'll go over a few of them in a little bit. Also, you need to have a paragraph. It's not just the graphic alone that suffices for this project. Every time you use a picture in an essay or a technical document, you need to have at least one paragraph that immediately refers to that image. Common sense is not that common. Never just assume your audience is going to get what you're saying. So you always have to have a picture to make information more simple, and then a paragraph to guide your audience by the hand and make sure they absolutely understand what that graphic is talking about and what it means to them and the overall document. How does that graphic prove what you're trying to say? It's just like quotes in an essay. You can't just let quotes hang by themselves. You have to explain quotes after you give them to make sure the audience understands where you're going with this. Same thing with graphics. But instead of just a sentence or two, you need an entire paragraph to say, hey, this is what this graphic shows. As you can see from figure 1, this shows the amount of growth our company is predicting or going through. Something like that. Don't spread yourself too thin. Don't put too much information in your graphic. Remember, you want to take one simple message or one major idea and codify that into one image. Don't try to put too many different images all at once. It's going to make the graphic really, really user unfriendly. And also, don't go on forever. Like I said, you need a paragraph. You don't need a full 2 or 3 pages to explain this graphic. Remember, keep it simple. That's the whole point of technical documentation, is trying to make things as short and to the point as possible. It's the opposite of what you were taught in a lot of comp writing for essays. You want to make things concise, simple, blunt, and honest as absolutely possible. Now, there are not one, but 2 PowerPoints that I included with this lesson. The first one is visual rhetoric as a whole. This one's both good for composition and for technical writing, because visual rhetoric is a long-standing discipline, and humans have been using images to convey meaning for millennia. And it's a huge, even it's probably its own topic that should stand alone, and kind of some people say it should be taught alone, but I think it's important to go over in both composition and technical writing because you really need to know this understanding. The human brain, the way it takes visual inputs, and all the different things that the brain almost instantaneously breaks down to and analyzes and judges, the instant it sees a picture and how our brain filters it through our emotions, how credible we think it, or how our logic functions, until it gets to our brain to actually say, okay, this is what this means, is incredibly complex. All of these different elements of an image need to be understood and anticipated when you are crafting this image. Colors have a huge impact. Like, how does this look? Is it unsettling? Is it weird? Is it alien? Are you feeling uncomfortable now? Most students actually say yeah to that, because some people say, oh, I would never drink this. It looks like LaCroix. It looks like it's going to taste like static. People say, I would not probably stop at the stop sign because it doesn't look like it's a real stop sign. Let's take us one step further. What if this sign wasn't in English? You see an octagon, but it's blue, and you see white letters. Do you think it's a stop sign? Because we have our own personal biases as to what we expect and what we anticipate and what we've been sort of bombarded with for a long period of time to understand what colors and shapes mean in our culture. And these colors and shapes differ from culture to culture. So there are a lot of elements you need to take consideration, but also the important thing is you need to cite your images. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to be a artistic person. You don't have to make incredible pieces of art to put into your project. These can be simple charts and graphs, they can be photographs, they can be anything that gets the job done. Now, however, if you take a picture that you did not make yourself and integrate it into your paper, you can do that. Your students, you are protected under fair use laws because you're using something for academic, non-commercial purposes. But you have to cite it twice. Pictures that aren't yours, you have to cite in a subscript the moment you give this image, and then this citation will appear at the very end in your reference page at the very end of your paper. So you'll have 2 citations per image. And even if you did not take this graphic from somewhere else, you made a graphic yourself, or you took a photograph yourself, you will probably still need a citation, because even though it's your graph, we need to know where those numbers came from, where the information you're putting in that graph came from. The only time you don't need to cite something is if it's completely made by you, and if the numbers you did are something that you did the groundwork yourself and number crunched it by yourself. So if it's a picture taken from somewhere else, you have to cite where that came from. If it's something you made yourself, but you had to do some research for the numbers that you put into it, you need to cite where those numbers came from, and they'll appear twice, immediately after the graphic and at the very end in the reference page. Also, every single picture needs a label, and they'll be labeled chronologically, figure 1, figure 2, and the paragraph above or the paragraph below needs to explicitly talk about and refer to that picture by the label you've given it. You have to, if you call it figure 1, you have to refer to it as figure 1 in all subsequent paragraphs. Now, there are 2 different labels, figures and tables. Tables are just like Excel spreadsheets. They're just a big spreadsheet column of numbers. If you can't feasibly put it into an artistic method, just put a spreadsheet there to get us numbers and columns and rows that show us the raw data. Those are called tables. Everything else is called a figure. A chart, a graph, a picture, a photograph, a map, whatever, is called a figure. Tables and figures are labeled separately. So you can have on page 2, figure 1, a few pages later, figure 2, and then the next page you have a table. That's now table 1 because they're labeled separately. One thing you might want to consider doing is after you do your table of contents for your final project, your final draft, have a separate table for table of illustrations so we don't have to flip through and find all the pictures. A lot of companies and documents do this, where they have a separate bespoke table of contents for just the pictures and graphics they've used. And it will look something like this in your paper itself. The next one notes I gave, and you can do this yourself, is just sort of like talking about graphics in general and the different types of graphics that you can use in your paper. Questions you have to ask yourself about the purpose of the image, the sort of the balancing act of, is it user friendly, is it a functional graphic, and is it aesthetically pleasing? That's a difficult thing to balance between beautiful, looking nice, looking cool, and actual functionality, getting the message across, not being too muddied. Simple images just like this, perfectly fine. You don't need to go above and beyond anything like this, as long as it has information that you can compress and that's relevant to the reader and it's explained well to the reader. This one is a bit busy, because as you can see, you have to hunt and pick for all the information. It's not spread out in any logical order. Now, when you have something like this, you want to make sure that the different slices of this ring descend in a chronological or numerical order. So you should have the biggest one here, second biggest, third biggest, and so on and so forth, until you get to the smaller one, the smallest one at the very end. Right now it's kind of disorganized. This one's way too busy. This one has way too much information and actually makes it harder to understand the information rather than making it easier to understand the information. This is way too ambiguous, and it's way too ambitious to simplify the information. That is just really bad on the eyes. Also, you want to make sure that your numbers are correct. This looks like a nice graph, but if you count the numbers, these go way above 100%, don't they? Also, the numbers aren't to scale. For some reason, 42% and 22% are the exact same size. 61% is somehow bigger than 78%. It makes no sense. So you want to make sure that you're using good, clean graphics, only trying to get across one simple message, and you want to make sure that it's pleasing. Color is also a major important part. If you notice, a lot of the early 2000s movie posters all had the same color scheme, blue and orange and teal. That's because of color theory. Colors have deep-rooted meanings to all of us. They have subconscious effects on every viewer. If you notice, a vast majority of restaurants, especially fast food restaurants, have red in their logos. And that's because red induces hunger in us. Where a lot of big box department stores have blue in their architecture and signs and whatnot. That's because blue gives us a calming effect. And when we feel calm, we feel safe. And when we feel safe, we're more willing to spend money. Colors can be used very, very smartly and wisely, and almost sneakily, to have psychological subconscious effects on the viewer. The orange and teal one was so popular because orange and teal are complementary colors, meaning they are at the very opposite end of the color wheel from each other. And when you put two complementary colors together, they actually draw the attention of the reader. When you see colors that clash, it draws your attention. Suicide Squad did the same thing with green and blue, green and purple. So understanding the color you want to use, the color's meaning, the color psychological effects is super important. But also you want to make sure it's accessible, and this is a major part in the reading. Colorblind people exist. You don't want to alienate anyone in your audience, even if it's a disability you might not think of. So never put blue and green together, never put red and green together, because those are the two most common types of color blindness. Also, they clash and look ugly together, and they really bleed horribly. So make sure that your graphics is not just professional looking, but also accessible and doesn't alienate the colorblind. And there are different types of graphics, and I give a little rundown of all of them, what to do and what not to do with each one. These can all be made in Microsoft Word easily. There's also pictures you can make yourself, the different types of pictures and how the diagram out and why you would use them. So you have full creative control over this. Make sure that it bears some functionality to what your overall project's trying to prove. And also make sure that everyone in the group turns it in. Even if you're turning in the exact same document, everyone in the group needs to turn in their own copy. There are some of you who have not turned in the annotated bibliography yet. The deadline for the annotated bibliography is this Wednesday, 11:59 p.m. If the annotated bib is not in by this Wednesday, it will be a 0. No ifs, ands, or buts. So make sure you get it in for a maximum of an 85, but hey, that's much better than a 0. All right? So we are almost done with the semester. We have blazed through, shockingly, not too many questions and not too many people coming to me in my office hours. So make sure that if you have questions and need help, that you give me a shout out, and I'll be there to do whatever I can. All right? We'll get through the semester really good. We're almost done. Let's end on a strong note, and can't wait to see what you come up with. All right? Good luck.